Morning, Glory America, bonjour, hi Canada. I'm Hugh Hewitt, live inside a warming beltway, but still too cold to go out there. I know some of you have to get in your car and warm them up and get going, even though it is March 30th, Wednesday. I'm so glad to be here with you. The latest news. Shelling overnight in Kyiv demonstrated that the Russian promises of pulling back were, in fact, Russian promises, not American promises, and you can't rely on Russia. More than 4 million people have fled Ukraine after the Russian invasion, according to the UN Refugee Agency. Russia's foreign minister is in China. Lavrov, the bad guy, is with Wang, the bad guy, to talk about how they're going to lie to the West about which both of them are doing. Keep an eye on that meeting. If Lavrov goes from there to Turkey, maybe something is cooking. Various other small details. A NASA astronaut is going to get a lift on the Russian bus home from the spacecraft. That might be the last time that happens in a long time. Yesterday evening, as I was doing show prep, that's this morning, when I get up early and come down and do it. This late last night, there was some optimism about the Ukraine-Russia talks in Turkey. That was before Russian forces shelled Kyiv all night and day. Remember, they are a good 6 hours, 8 hours ahead of us, something like that right now from the Beltway. And however much they may be getting together in Istanbul, they are not doing so in Kyiv. British fighters, not British troops, but fighters from Britain on the side of the Free Ukraine, are savoring victory in the Battle of Irpin. Quote, as dogs devour the bodies of defeated Russians. That's kind of grisly. But it's a small victory in the overall war. Russia had said it would dramatically reduce military activity around Kyiv, according to the Financial Times last night, but they have not yet done so. The Orthodox leader, finally, the Orthodox leader of the Eastern Orthodox Christian, the Patriarch, Bartholomew I, has blasted the war. And so the Patriarch is the ecumenical Patriarch of Constantinople. He didn't mention Putin, but finally Eastern Orthodoxy is in the game saying this is awful. Horrible story in the Telegraph about Russian soldiers are treated like throwaway things. Putin just treats them like throwaway broken toys. He sent them blind on a, quote, suicide mission into clouds of radioactive dust outside of Chernobyl. They ran into something called the Red Wood. And the guys who run Chernobyl said, what? Nobody goes in there. That's just the death sentence. And they didn't have on protective gear. Way to go, Putin. Way to take care of your troops. Ukraine has proposed neutral status with guarantees. Zelensky is seeking more Western help. Fluid situation. Zelensky last night said to his people, there's a little progress in Istanbul, but don't expect the shelling to stop. Hang in there. Germany is expecting to have to gas ration throughout the winter. Now, the good news is we're almost through the winter. Remember, it's March 30th. So it's a little bit colder in Germany than it is in Virginia, but it will be getting warmer and gas will be flowing. They'll have 6 months, 8 months to get ready for a complete Russian shutdown. The U.S. is targeting, according to the Wall Street Journal, the oligarchs' hidden assets. Good. I hope they do that. A second terrorist attack. I think it's actually a third terrorist attack in Israel in as many days. A Palestinian gunman killed 5 people in central Israel yesterday. The third suspected terrorist attack. Very grisly wave of terror underway in Israel. Israel is, however, working with its Arab allies, not the terrorists, obviously, but with the Arab allies, the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, on an air defense agreement, integrating their 3 air forces into a common defense, which is necessary because of Iranian drones being sent from Yemen, and eventually they'll come directly across the Red Sea. The Queen yesterday went and walked into, surprising everyone, the memorial service for Prince Philip, her deceased husband, at Westminster Abbey, walked down and stood throughout the service. Whenever hymns were called to be sung, she rose and sang. She's an amazing woman. When you consider she was on the balcony on VE Day alongside of Winston Churchill and her father, the King, of course, the Queen, her mother, and her sister, the 5 of them on the balcony, famous picture. And then, that was 1945, May 8th, 1945. And here is Queen Elizabeth yesterday. Same queen, same woman. France's Macron's front-runner status conceals deep rifts in society. There are like 5 divisions in France. Macron will probably win because it's Le Pen, and the extreme right can't figure out they got to jettison the Le Pen brand and bring in someone from the center right. So it looks like Macron gets reelected. Governor Ron DeSantis, props to him. Bravo, Ron DeSantis. He vetoed a congressional map drawn by Republicans because it was too tepid. Didn't go for the throat. Now, Democrats have gone for the throat in California, in New York, Illinois, Maryland. Of course, they always do it in Massachusetts. Wherever they have control, Democrats have gone for the throat to try and wrest another congressional district to try and stop the looming red wave from washing them away. And you don't hear a word about it because they're Democrats. And the courts are packed with Democrats, and they say, oh, good. Pennsylvania's court and Wisconsin court, Democratic courts, have attempted to overturn Republican maps in those two states. The Ohio Supreme Court is screwing around with the Ohio map. Ron DeSantis runs everything down there with the Republican legislature, and Ron just says, Governor DeSantis says, go for the throat. I like that. Kudos to Ron DeSantis. You can now get, if you're over 50, a second booster, a fourth overall shot. Sign me up. I will be in line. This is not a mandate. This is Hugh Hewitt's opinion. I do not believe in opening myself up to the risk of the coronavirus. Anyone with asthma is silly to do that, and so I'm going to go and get it as soon as it's available. And you can get it 4 months after your last booster, which is for me more than 4 months. Just sign me up. The second COVID-19 booster shot endorsed by FDA, CDC, and for adults 50 and older. They will be available. I just bring in your card and say, I'm ready, I want it. And there is no controversy here. They should have done it months ago. It was obvious. And especially those of you with underlying conditions far more serious than mine, you got to go get it as soon as you can. And New York City is going to remove 150 homeless encampments. Now let me run through the key sequence here for you. This is Joe Biden Thursday in Poland talking to the 82nd Airborne, cut number 1.
And you're going to see when you're there, some of you have been there, you're going to see women, young people standing in the middle in front of a damn tank, just saying, I'm not leaving. I'm holding my ground. They're incredible.
Okay, you're not actually going to see that because you're not going, as he had to write back. But then he went and talked to President Duda, cut number 2.
I think even you Poles who know Ukraine so well have to be a little bit surprised at how much courage and capacity and resilience the Ukrainian people. When you see a 30-year-old woman standing there in front of a tank with a rifle. I mean, talk about what happened in Tiananmen Square. That's Tiananmen Square squared.
Now, there's nothing wrong with that Poles are watching on TV. They're not watching Ukraine. They're not in Ukraine. And Joe Biden says this, cut number 5.
I was talking to the troops. We were talking about helping train the troops that are the Ukrainian troops that are in Poland. That's what the
Wait, did you say train? Did you say train? Kate Bedingfield comes out at the White House
on
presser.
Ukraine, yesterday, did the president accidentally reveal a previously unknown effort for the U.S. to be training Ukrainian forces in Poland during his answer in the press conference?
No. The troops that he met with...
No, he didn't. But General Todd Walters, the NATO Supreme Allied Commander, gets a question from Tom Cotton. Listen, cut number 4.
The president said while he was in Europe that we are training Ukrainian forces in Poland. Is that accurate?
At this time, is that the time setting of the statement?
That's what the president said. Jake Sullivan said we are not. I'm just trying to figure out if we are or are not.
I do not believe that we are in the process of currently training military forces from...
Oh, the president made it all up. That's the Allied Supreme Allied Commander. President's just making stuff up. More ahead on the Hugh Hewitt Show. Gloria America, bonjour, hi Canada. I'm Hugh Hewitt inside a chilly and wet beltway. The breaking news is that Russia sees no sign of breakthrough in talks with Ukraine, according to the Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov, throwing cold water on the warming hope for peace in Ukraine. I'm joined by United States Senator Joni Ernst, recently returned from a visit to Europe. Good morning, Senator. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks so much, Hugh.
Always good to have you. There is a lead editorial in the Wall Street Journal today, America's Declining Military. It's about the Biden budget that was proposed yesterday. I want to talk about Ukraine, but I need your reaction as a member of the Armed Services Committee to what I think is a disastrous budget.
Yeah, it is. And, this is not a time to hold back on support for the military. As we see, not just what's going on in Ukraine, but all around the world, we need a strong national defense. And Biden's budget, it's not serious about assisting our men and women in uniform. It's not serious about deficit reduction. It will raise the deficit by over $1.5 trillion. It's a shell game. It's budget gimmicks. His plans are costly. They're unpopular, and most certainly they are unrealistic. So again, as it goes back and applies to the Department of Defense, it really is a flat budget for our national defense, especially when we see what's going on around the world. It's very important that we focus on national defense.
Senator Ernst, last hour I played from 1946, 15 minutes of Churchill's Fulton, Missouri speech, in which he said, I warned everybody, and nobody would listen. And everybody is warning everyone now about Putin and Xi and Khamenei, and the Democrats won't listen. Did any Democrats go with you on the Codel? That I know John Cornyn went with you, but did any Democrats go?
Yes, they did. It was a bipartisan group, actually tripartisan. We had an independent, Angus King of Maine.
Great senator.
We did have Jackie Rose and Kirsten Gillibrand. So it was a bipartisan delegation, 10 United States senators that went on this Codel. And I would think that many of the Democrats will be speaking with us in one voice as we address the issue of Ukraine. And so we went on this Codel. Our takeaway is that Ukraine can win as long as the free world, including the United States, can help unite and stand up, provide the lethal aid necessary, stand up to Vladimir Putin's tyranny.
Now, Senator King's a very smart guy, and he's on armed services. I don't think he's the chair of armed services.
No,
I think
no.
he's of a subcommittee, maybe on cyber.
Yes.
What do your Democratic friends think about this budget? It's a fake budget. They're retiring 24 very crucially needed ships.
Yes, and when it comes to defense and defense appropriations, this is Biden's budget. We have to remember that. It's President Biden's budget. He's required by law to put out a budget. However, it is the Congress that will do the authorizations, make those appropriations. So those of us on the Armed Services Committee, we are going to ask for more, and I'm one of those, I like to balance the fact that we need to fund our military, but we need to make sure that those taxpayer dollars are being used wisely. I think many feel the same way. So we need to bolster our defense spending and make sure that we're providing the modernization efforts needed to push back against these growing autocratic regimes around the world. But the Democrats do feel the same way, and we have seen that in recent years where the president will come out with one budget, and then we as Congress will decide what is right for the Department of Defense. So we actually ended up a little higher than the president's budget had called for last year in defense spending. So we hope to be able to do that again this coming year.
So if the Congress concludes, do not retire those 24 ships, you can direct the Department of Defense to maintain those 24 cruisers.
Well, we can authorize the dollars. We can't tell them what they can and can't do as far as retiring equipment unless it's specifically written into law. So, we could attempt to do that. And if the Navy is telling us we need these ships, then that's something that we most certainly would want to listen to.
I don't think the Navy's going to tell you that, but I think navalists are going to tell you that. I'll talk with Congressman Gallagher about that. Yesterday, Senator Cotton was on, your colleague on armed services, and he said, if I may be a little providential, he's an Army guy like you're an Army lady, he said the Ukraine war proves the primacy of infantry. Actually, what it proves to me is that asymmetric warfare is hell when you're on the receiving end. We've been on the receiving end of it for 20 years in Afghanistan and Iraq, where people use drones and IEEDs.
Right.
And now we are sending very lethal asymmetric weaponry. But are we sending enough, Senator Ernst?
I don't believe we are. I believe we have approved most of what the Ukrainians are asking for. But what we heard on this Codel from a number of the Ukrainian leaders that were in this Ukrainian civil society group that we met with in Poland, what they stated was that, yes, you may have approved all of this, but it's trickling into the country. So somewhere, somehow, someone is controlling how much we are dispersing into Ukraine at certain times. And I understand. And the women in this Ukrainian civil society, these leaders, they stated quite clearly, they said it, I didn't, they said it, you have Afghanistan syndrome. So what we are projecting on that country is that we don't want to put too many weapons and equipment into the country, because what if it falls? The Russians will be able to get a hold of the equipment. But my argument in this case, because this is a very different scenario, would be we need to provide that equipment. If we don't, most certainly Ukraine will fall to Russia. But if we provide it, the Ukrainians can win. So this is a very different scenario than what we saw in Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, we had very war-weary people. They just laid down their arms and blended back into the woodwork. What we have here are a people that have a willingness to fight. They have a well-trained military. They can take on this equipment and use it appropriately.
Well, that brings me to the mini drone. I know we've sent 100 of the super-duper killer one-way drones. 100. The United States usually sends things in like packages of 10,000. What is the deal with sending them 100? There are thousands of tanks there, thousands of Russians.
Exactly. And so, again, this is where I feel that we can bolster them more. And what we have to realize, too, we're not the only country that is providing lethal aid. So all of that is coordinated through NATO, through General Walters, who is the Supreme Allied Commander of Europe. So all of these other countries are providing various devices, drones, lethal aid into Ukraine as well. So we're not the only ones, but I do believe that we need to have everything at the ready for the Ukrainians. Have it there if we need to send in 1,000 drones, if we have them available and it doesn't put our own national security at risk, we should provide that. So that is another question that has come up, because as we are providing drones, javelins, stingers, we also need to make sure that we are able to backfill in our own inventory and get the lines that produce those types of munitions, get them up and going. Because what we don't want to do is provide all of this into Ukraine. We want them to win, but then leave ourselves at jeopardy as well.
Yesterday, Senator, you had Todd Walters, the Supreme Commander, in front of the Armed Services Committee, and I played a question that Tom Cotton asked him. There are no Americans training Ukrainian troops. He said that. The president has misspoken a number of times.
Oh, God,
do you agree with Senator Cotton that maybe it's best if the president just stops talking?
Yeah, I can't believe that we have a leader of what I would consider the greatest country in the world, the strongest military in the world, and he can't get it right. You know, every time he has been in a major speech at a very pivotal moment, the president misspeaks. And, of course, the Russians are going to use that in their propaganda. You know, here's this weak leader who, you know, his White House press team has to clean up whatever he says. This is really an unfortunate situation, not just for President Biden and his team, but for the United States of America. He needs to stop. You know, great if he has a scripted, speech in front of him. But for heaven's sakes, the man should stop going off the cuff because he keeps getting it wrong.
Yeah, boy, does it ever. Senator Joni Ernst, always a pleasure to talk to you from Iowa. Thank you, Senator. Don't go anywhere, America. Mike Gallagher. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt, joined by Congressman Mike Gallagher, member of the House Armed Services Committee and the House Intelligence Committee. Good morning, Congressman. Welcome back.
Good to be back, Hugh.
The president put in a defense budget yesterday. Normally we banter around, but I want to dig into this. And the Wall Street Journal slams it today as wholly inadequate. Senator Ernst of the Senate Armed Services slammed it at the beginning of the hour. What is your assessment of the president's budget yesterday?
I think the budget signals that President Biden and his defense team are choosing decline in this decade. They have no sense of the urgency of the threat we face, particularly the threat posed by the Chinese Communist Party, a threat which will grow more acute at the midpoint of this decade. The budget is built on magical assumptions about inflation, which are just at odds with reality, and the fact that they're selling it as a defense increase, even though all of the increase will be eaten by inflation, and it does not keep pace with inflation, is profoundly intellectually dishonest, which leads me to my second point. They're wrapping this defense cut, and that's what it is, in this pseudo-intellectual jargon that they're calling integrated deterrence. And this is what I tried to write about in an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal today. Integrated deterrence is a fancy way of saying we can afford to cut hard power and somehow magical new technology that won't come online until a decade from now, or allies or soft power can pick up the slack. Integrated deterrence is precisely the type of deterrence that failed to deter Putin in Ukraine. And now the Biden Pentagon is trying to pretend like it was a success. It is a disgrace. I agree completely with what my colleague Elaine Luria said about the Navy components of the budget in particular. And if we don't wake up...
She's a Democrat.
She's a Democrat from Virginia, had what I thought was a very brave and on-the-money string of tweets about this, and pointed to the simple fact, you know, Hugh, I was a liberal arts major, so check my math on this, but the Navy is proposing to pay for 9 ships, but then decommission 24 ships. So what does that mean? A net loss of 15 ships? It is time for the Secretary of the Navy to take a stand against this nonsense. It makes absolutely no sense, and the Biden Pentagon needs to go back to the drawing board, revisit their assumptions, and it's clear to me they have learned no lessons from the ongoing crisis in Ukraine.
Now, Senator, when President Trump attempted to retire an aircraft carrier, the Congress said no, and they restored the cut. Will the Congress say no to the 24 ships? I mean, you can do that. You can say you will keep these ships running. We need the tubes, the VLS tubes. I'm not sure what they stand for, but they're missile tubes. And we're taking a whole bunch of them out of service when we need them increasingly in the South China Sea and around the world. Will Congress throw a roadblock in the way of the decommissioning of those ships?
I believe we will. And as evidence, I would say last year in the NDAA process, we did precisely that. We took a look at an inadequate Biden budget that was a cut in real terms, and we, in a bipartisan fashion, decided to increase the top line. And the threats have only grown more urgent since. Obviously, there will be debates over different priorities: Army, Navy, Air Force, Space Force, Marine Corps. There's a debate about the Marine Corps right now. But I believe, on balance, Congress, in a bipartisan fashion, will say to the Biden administration, this makes no sense, and we will take corrective action. That being said, Hugh, the more we're at war with ourselves and the more we have to argue over all this stuff, is the more we lose time. And we still don't have a coherent plan on the sea power side for growing the size of the Navy and eventually getting to 355 ships. We don't have a 30-year shipbuilding plan. When we get it next month, it will provide a range of options. It will be useless. That's what really concerns me, because you're right. I think the math on the net 15 loss of ships is about 1,000 VLS tubes, which is an acronym for vertical launch systems, that we're losing. And at a time when, you know, the PLA has built a rocket force that is designed to sink our ships, we need more VLS tubes that are in the Western Pacific. We need more teams of Marines that are in range of Taiwan. And if you think that somehow Xi is deterred because Putin's experiencing some friction in Ukraine, you are not paying attention to the lifelong ambition of the General Secretary of the Chinese Communist Party. I believe we will see a crisis over Taiwan, and the more we disinvest in our own defense and pretend we're doing something smart and invent new phrases like integrated deterrence to cover up a cut to conventional defense, the more we make that invasion likely. So I believe the Congress must step up to the plate and force the Biden administration to do better.
integrated deterrence has twice as many syllables as appeasement, but half as much sense. Because at least when Hitler was rebuilding, there was no evidence in 33, 34, 35 of his malign intent beyond the German-speaking peoples of Austria and Czechoslovakia. Now we know what Putin has told us what Putin wants. Xi has told us what Xi wants. And I played Churchill's Fulton, Missouri speech, 15 minutes of it in the first hour, to underscore that he said, I told everybody, and nobody would listen. I am curious, does anybody listen in the Pentagon? Is anyone talking to you, or are they under the thumb of the president?
I think you're seeing the influence of not only the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, for whom every dollar spent on defense is a dollar robbed from their transformative domestic project, but also I think there's a certain group at the top of the Pentagon right now which almost has they almost like to fetishize technology, right? This is so-called third offset thinking, where all we need, and if you look at the budget, it shows this, right? Because where most of the increases are happening are in the R&D budget. I'm all for R&D. Obviously, technology is important, but if you believe that the crisis over Taiwan is most acute at the midpoint of this decade, i.e. 2024, 2025, as multiple Indo-PACOM commanders have told us, then that divest to invest strategy makes absolutely no sense. As for the
I'm drowning in cliches. Divest to invest, third offset. What are we talking about with third offset? That's like, is that the Packers' decision to go for it on fourth again? What is that?
That's right. It would be equally as disastrous.
What is third offset?
Okay, so we've had various offsets in defense history. The first was the advent of nuclear weapons, which gave us this massive advantage. The second was the development of precision-guided munitions in the late 60s, mid-70s, which gave us an advantage. Now we are looking for a third offset where technology will magically save us from the conventional disparities we have relative to China and Russia. I don't think it's going to happen. I have not seen it. We are sort of waiting like Godot for some magical technology to come. The Pentagon, multiple services have talked about JADC2, Joint All-Domain Command and Control, being sort of their top priority. I think it's built on a lot of assumptions about technology which don't make sense. What we've seen in Ukraine is the opposite. It's the importance of fielding technology that works today. Javelins, Stingers, loitering munitions, things that are cheap, that you can easily replicate. We need to be stockpiling the munitions that we have today, not betting on magical technology that we don't know.
Senator Cotton tells me we need more Army infantry after watching Ukraine. And I mean, he might be right. Would you please update me on what is going on in the Marine Corps? I have read a little bit about this, but I am an armchair civilian. And I have no opinions on what the Commandant is doing or what the criticism is, but what do you, as a member of the Armed Services Committee and as a Marine, think about what is going on inside of the Marines?
Well, Commandant Berger has tried to grapple with what the 2018 National Defense Strategy directed him and the other services to do, which is to prioritize China and implement a strategy of deterrence by denial, which makes sense as opposed to a integrated deterrence strategy. I still don't know what that means.
Neither do I.
What this group of retired Marine Corps general officers is concerned about is that in pursuit of that, they're cutting certain weapon systems in the Marine Corps, specifically tanks, artillery, certain aircraft, and that will have a negative impact on the lethality of the force. Now, I think Berger deserves credit for experimenting. I think reasonable Marines can disagree about how you organize a Marine Corps infantry battalion, but I do think it makes sense to field these nemesis systems, which are, long-range fires, small teams of Marines. I do think what we're seeing in Ukraine right now is the democratization of air power, so it makes sense to invest in so-called LMAMs, which are, small, remotely piloted drone that can deliver really devastating effects. And I do think over the long term, we have to grapple with the fact that the maintenance costs of the F-35 and the CH-53 system are very exorbitant. Now, I hope this debate actually tests a lot of Berger's assumptions. If we have unlimited resources, sure, let's have more artillery, let's have more tanks. And at the end of the day, we don't want to do anything to compromise what I believe is the heart of the Marine Corps, and that is the toughness and the lethality of that Marine infantry squad, platoon, and company, and their ability to locate, close with, and destroy the enemy. And I think both Berger and this group of general officers agree that that warrior ethos is at the heart of everything, and no technology can substitute for that. So we're going to have a big.
Can I ask one quick question? I've watched the Ukrainian fighter jet pilots destroy lots and lots of Russian assets, and the fighter pilot community has told me, have you seen what the Ukrainians are doing? They're better trained than the Russians. They're killing Russians, and they are deterring the advance. Doesn't that mean we need more F-35s? I mean, they're doing the job. The Top Guns of Ukraine are doing the job.
Well, it is our 5th-gen fighter. We don't have an alternative. The issue is the range, and the range of the carrier air wing. But that's a solvable problem with things like MQ-25. And so my only point is that, we can figure this out if we have patriotic, smart people locked in a room with certain members of Congress armed with a map of the Indo-Pacific saying, what do we actually need to do to deter the PLA? This is a solvable problem, as the bravery of the Ukrainians proves us. Again, these are different theaters. I'm not trying to say it's an apples-to-apples comparison, but we can figure this out. Instead, we keep going back and forth between wildly inconsistent plans, and now we have the creep of progressive priorities into the Pentagon's decision-making, and that is ultimately destructive. So we have to figure it out before it's too late. And the midpoint of this decade may be when it's too late. We're in the window of maximum danger, and we need to wake up.
And if anybody says integrated deterrence to you, laugh at them. It's not denial. It's not peace through strength, as Churchill said. You just have to have the weapons. Mike Gallagher, good to talk to you, Congressman. Be back next week at Rep Gallagher on Twitter. Do not miss a minute. I love having the smart guys on from the Congress like Joni. Live inside the Beltway with an old friend, Len Khodorkovsky, who was the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State under Mike Pompeo at the State Department. Good morning, Len. How are you?
Morning, Hugh. Always great to be with you.
Thank you for being up early. I want to ask you about two things, Ukraine and the IRGC. Let's start with Ukraine. You still have family. You're a Soviet emigre to New York. You watched the Soviet Union fall from this side of the curtain. What's going on, in your opinion, in Ukraine right now?
Well, it's horrific, Hugh. It's probably even worse than what people are seeing on their TVs. It's not the same all over the country. Some parts are getting it worse than others. I do have cousins who have been evacuated from Kiev. They're along with other folks who are trying to get away with their families, and in a town that's less dangerous at this point, but they're on the run, like so many people. My family that's still there is, it consists of, 3 women who are a little bit on the older side and 1 male who's of fighting age. And so he kind of has to stay back and fight for his country. The 3 women could theoretically try and escape into Poland or Romania or Hungary, but decided to stay with my male cousin. So, it's a very precarious situation. Some of the cities in Ukraine are analogous to Beirut of the 70s or 80s. They're complete shells of what they used to be. It's a horror show. As you mentioned, I did grow up in Ukraine, the western part of Ukraine. It's surreal thinking about the streets, the people, in my mind's eye, I'm imagining what is going on the ground, and it's very hard to put it all together. But look, there are many heroes in this story. There are also many villains, starting with Putin, the villainous warlord who's upended the lives of millions of people, not just Ukrainians, the Russians too. A lot of Russian families are in the dark about where their children are going, and you're seeing some Russians protest Putin, putting their lives in danger, and so I want to make sure that people understand that the greatest victims here are regular people. They're regular.
Len, thousands. I'm glad you brought that. Thousands of Russians are not coming home. I don't know that they know that yet. Do you think Russia is up to speed with how badly mauled many of their units have been by Ukrainian resistance?
Many people are not, because they get their news from state TV or state sources, especially the older people and the older generation. The younger people do look to social media and the alternate sources of information so they know better, but most people don't. Most people are in the dark. They are susceptible to Putin's propaganda, and still, even people that I know tend to mimic, the state propaganda sometimes, and it just tells you the power of censorship and the power of depriving people of information.
And
a lot of these people are good people. They just don't know what's going on, and frankly, a lot of people in Ukraine don't know what's going on either. We probably know more than they do in a lot of instances.
Now, I want to switch rather suddenly, Len Khodorkovsky, to your old area of expertise, Iran. I am stunned that Qatar, now designated a non-NATO major ally of the United States, hosted a weapons show last week at which the IRGC was showing off their wares, their lethal wares. Why is the IRGC allowed to do that's within miles of our base there? Why is the IRGC allowed to go anywhere? Why are we thinking about taking the sanctions off of the IRGC? It's a terrorist, gangster, mafia-like organization.
You're right. They shouldn't be allowed. Qatar wants to have it both ways. They want to be our friend and they want to be the Iranian regime's friend. That is unfortunately is something that we're entertaining. As a matter of fact, the Biden administration, I think, wants to give Qatar an enhanced position vis-a-vis relations with the United States, which is troubling considering they're trying to play both sides here. But let's talk about the IRGC, the Iran Revolutionary Guard Corps. This is, by all definitions, a terrorist organization. They have American blood on their hands. On the record, we know that they're responsible for at least 600 American deaths in Iraq. We know that they foment terror and destruction and death all over the Middle East, in Lebanon, in Iraq, in Yemen, in Syria. This is clearly a terrorist organization, and to even entertain the idea of taking that designation off of them just tells you how desperate the Biden administration seems to be in claiming some sort of a diplomatic victory. Now, I'll give you an example of something similar that the Biden administration did, which is continuing to damage our national security. They've lifted the similar FTO, Foreign Terrorist Organization, designation from the Houthis in Yemen. Houthis in Yemen are a proxy of the Iranian regime. And what they've gotten for lifting this designation is barrages of missiles into Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, and our allies in the region. You can be sure that once we lift the FTO designation for IRGC, you will get that times 10.
Len, I do not understand who's making the decisions here, and I am concerned that the president is not making the decisions. You were in the belly of the beast at the Department of State. You know what the Department of State believes. They believe that we ought to integrate Iran into the community of nations and that they will change and the hardliners will fall behind. It's nonsense. It's all nonsense. I played Churchill's Fulton speech in the first hour just to remind people, we've been here before. There are clear-eyed people out there. What is their motivating strategy? I mean, honestly, I try and figure out what the Team Biden think they're getting. Do you know what they think they're getting?
Well, I can't read Rob Malley's mind, but I can try.
Explain who that is. Who is that?
So Rob Malley is the Biden administration's chief negotiator with the Iranian regime. He's the special envoy for Iran, representing America's interests vis-a-vis the Iran portfolio. He is the one who is in Vienna. I should clarify, he's not even across the table from the Iranians. He is using a Russian intermediary to represent the United States at the table with the Iranians. Now, if you thought that the premise of your question was outlandish, think about that scenario. Any wonder why we are where we are?
Well, where are we? I mean, what is their theory? Read Rob Malley's mind. How do they think the world works when we give billions of dollars to a terrorist state? What do they think will happen that's good?
Well, if I try and break it down with my psychiatrist hat on, I would say, look, number one, the Biden administration, which is Obama administration 2.0 in terms of personnel, felt extremely offended by the Trump administration leaving their precious JCPOA, which basically provided a patient pathway to the Iranian regime to a nuclear weapon. So they are still distraught about that. And President Biden, when he was running for president, said, I am going to go back into JCPOA. The trouble is, you couldn't put Humpty Dumpty back together again. There is no JCPOA. The deal that is being negotiated right now is a shell of even the original Iran deal, which was extremely flawed to say the least. So I think what Secretary Blinken, what Rob Malley, what President Biden have been saying is that, all other things aside, their terrorism, their hostage taking, their missile development, all of that is off the table, and we just have to concern ourselves with preventing them from getting a nuclear weapon. However, the deal they're negotiating is actually providing a pathway towards a nuclear weapon. It's just a religious belief.
And funding.
Absolutely.
So Len, are we provoking by our weakness Israel into striking Iran? I want people to understand. I think this is provoking Israel into having to do preemptive strikes on Iran. What do you think?
I think Israel is absolutely in a different place. They have an existential threat from the regime in Iran. Their decision making cannot be tied to the Biden administration's dithering. They will do what they have to do to protect their citizens, and I hope it doesn't get to the point where we're on the brink of war in the Middle East, because there have been so many positive developments in the Middle East in recent years and days, as a matter of fact.
Days. The big summit. Yep, the big summit. Len, we are out of time. Follow Len at Message from Len on Twitter. Len Khodorkovsky, thank you, my friend. Always good to get an update from someone who knows as much as Leonard does about what's going on in the Middle East, and especially with the terrorist regime in Tehran. Go nowhere, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Inside the Beltway Live, where it's raining. I catch a lot of grief. I have on Congressman Gallagher every week. He's on House Armed Services. He's a Marine. I have on Admiral Stavridis every week, former NATO Allied Supreme Commander. He's from the Navy. I got Tom Cotton on every week. He's the Army infantryman. So I don't have any Air Force guys, right? No Air Force people. Joni Ernst, she's National Guard. And so there aren't any Air Force people until someone said, what about Chris Stewart in Utah? I said, okay, we'll give him a shot, because Martin Baseman, who is an old-time associate producer of mine, said, that's not his real name, I'm just joking, said, talk to Congressman Stewart about the defense budget. So I said, okay, we'll give it a try. But he's an Air Force guy. Does he get up before 9? And here he is. It is, in fact, true, Congressman, that you were awake before 9 a.m., because you're an Air Force guy.
Well, I understand, but I did have a golf tee time at about 8:45. So, yeah, I got up early today.
No, in my family, I've got an F-18 pilot, so he gives me hell whenever I bring on you Air Force people. So I've just got to give you a little grief in the morning, because, I'm not supposed to give you any time at all.
Yeah, for sure. And look, it's great to be with you, and you do need an Air Force guy, right? So I'm glad to be here.
Well, let's talk. Let's get serious. You hold some records, but I was doing my research. Are you still the fastest guy to make it around the world?
I am indeed. Fastest nonstop flight around the world in the B-1, which was back in when we were flying. Oh my gosh, there'd be times when I think, I can't believe they paid me to do this. And I want you to know I've never felt that way since I've been in Congress.
Well, yeah, that's slowing down quite a bit to go to appropriations, isn't it?
It is, but I also sit on the Intel Committee, which is the most fascinating work that there is, actually. It's just so engaging, as you can imagine. So
I do. I just think I feel bad for you, because you got to work with Gallagher and all that Packers talk. I mean, that's a bad part. That's a very downside. So, Congressman, I wanted to go serious on very quickly. The defense budget was released yesterday. It's a joke. Elaine Luria called it a joke. She's a Democrat from Virginia. She's going to get wiped out. Democrats are going to get wiped. Americans want to be protected. What do you think of the president's budget? Take all the time you need.
Well, okay, you got 2 or 3 hours. Look, this thing is kind of like the the Biden presidency. It isn't mostly dead. It's all the way dead. There's no way this budget sees anything but a laughable hearing here in Congress, and everyone knows it. And by the way, that's true of most presidential budgets. They're an aspirational vision. They're a statement not of numbers, but a statement of what their priorities are. But the thing that makes this so discouraging, to the point of not being serious, actually, is that the priorities that he has put forward are so laughable when you consider what the real interest of the American people are. And the American people have made their interests very clear in the last year or so. And he seems to be just completely tone deaf to this. And as a national security expert, someone who I think I understand this about as well as anyone that I know, it endangers our own security, as you said. That's the fundamental responsibility of the federal government, to protect Americans and American security. This budget simply doesn't do that. And I can illustrate it with one fact among many, but I'll start with this. It doesn't even keep up with the rate of inflation. It's a 4.5% increase. That sounds like a lot, unless you understand that inflation is going to be somewhere between 7 and 10%. And inflation in things that we have to spend on the military, rare earth materials, for example, is going to go up dramatically more than that. This is essentially a 4, 5, or 6% cut in defense spending, and it has no vision at all about the actual strategic threats we're facing in our future. It ignores them completely. So, look.
Well, Congressman, let me put this on the table. I'm talking with Congressman Chris Stewart, 2nd District, Utah, Air Force veteran, on armed services, on Senate, on appropriations, on Senate, on House Intel. When this comes before you, do you have the ability to tear it? Ken Calvert is on here usually from Defense Appropriations. Are you on Defense Approps or a different part of Approps?
Different part.
Okay, so when the big committee gets the Defense Committee's approach, can you mark it up? Can you plus it up and direct that they not retire these 24 ships, for example, and their 1,000 tubes? Can you do that?
Yeah, we can, and we will. We did it last year. We'll do it again this year, and we'll probably have Democrats who will support us in this. In fact, we unquestionably will, because not every Democrat has lost their mind. And not every Democrat actually believes we live in this fairy tale where our own defense doesn't really matter. So it's the cut in ships. How about the cuts to the F-35? I mean, one of the few advantages we have militarily now against not just a peer, but in some cases they're ahead of us, in China, for example, in their J-20 fighter. It takes one of the few advantages we have, and that's in our technology in aviation, 5th generation aviation, cuts the F-35 program by 30%.
Yeah, I saw that. I couldn't believe it because the Vandross Doctrine holds that once a foreign country not obliged to buy a weapon system buys the weapon system that we allow them to buy, in this case Japan, Finland recently, that proves the efficacy of the F-35. It's the greatest fighter in the world because people who are not obliged to buy it are buying it. And yet we're cutting it.
Yeah.
I don't get it, Congressman. What do they tell you?
Well, I mean, there's a long list of things with this administration I don't get. I don't get why they open up the southern border. I don't get this debacle that we saw in Afghanistan. I don't get a long list of things. This is just one more added to that list. But like I said, who in the world sat in the room and said, hey, I got an idea. Let's cut the F-35, one of the most critical weapons programs we've had in a generation. Why don't we cut it by 30%?
Critical and successful. It's not like it's an LCS. That's the white elephant of the fleet is the LCS. I can understand dumping those ships, but not the F-35.
Yeah, and when I first started flying the B-1, it was a relatively new weapon system, and we went through some growing pains. We received some criticism during that time. So did the F-35. I get that. Over budget, there's no question. But it is also, no question, the most capable fighter in the world. And the costs have been driven down now. Economies of scale brought the price of an F-35 down now to about the same price as what you could buy one of the most advanced F-15s for. And the operational cost has been driven down to it's about the same. There is no plausible argument at all for why anyone would suggest to cut this purchase. And that's only one example among, again, many throughout this budget. It's just not a serious budget.
Okay, so Congressman, I'm going to come back to the budget in just a second. I got to ask you a Utah question. Your 2nd District of Utah, where is that?
Well, I have downtown Salt Lake City, and then it kind of wraps west and all the way south to St. George, which is some of the most beautiful red rock country in the entire world.
Oh, absolutely. I've driven that. So your governor's in trouble politically for vetoing a bill that everybody wants. Are you going to run against him for governor?
That's funny. I hear that once in a while. Look,
I hear it from O'Brien, former Ambassador O'Brien. He said, "Oh, Chris Stewart should be the governor. Chris Stewart should replace Mitt Romney when Mitt retires." I hear everything about you from Robert O'Brien, so I just want to know what's the plan.
Well, the governor has really got to explain this to the people, to his constituents in Utah. It's just so out of tune with what the vast majority of Utahns feel, and that is we want to protect our kids. We want to protect women's sports. We want to protect from this idea that our values are not coming from some think tank in New York City. And it surprised a lot of us, his position on that, and I haven't had a chance to discuss it with him.
So you're not ruling it out, though? You're not ruling out a run for governor?
Well, let me say this. I love my work, as I said, on intelligence and the work I do in the House. It really is a great fit for me.
I know, but that's not ruling out running for governor.
I love my work here. You know that.
If Marlin sends you into the Lions den, don't expect the Lions to, just say, hey, you've got an Air Force guy, let's play baseball with him. Congressman, let's go back to intel. When do you think this Ukraine adventurism by Putin ends, based on what you've seen, both open source and what you can talk about?
Yeah, it's going to be a long, violent, bloody, probably weeks and maybe months. And our whole goal is to not turn it into years. Fighting a proxy war in the Ukraine is so deadly for the Ukrainian people. And this has been the primary question. Hey, it's interesting. We knew Vladimir Putin was going to go into Ukraine as early as last November, maybe even late October. Our intel on this has just been so good, which, believe me, every time I say, hey, according to the intel, I kind of cringe because I know that a lot of people, including myself, go, blah, 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 intel. How many times have they been deceptive or been wrong?
Wrong.
No doubt. But in this case, they got it right. And so my whole objective has been in the last is how do we try to preclude it, and then now how do we minimize it, including U.S. involvement? For example, enforcing a no-fly zone would be a catastrophe.
Right.
I'm a defense hawk. I'm a former military guy, but I also think I've learned some lessons from the last 20 years. For us to engage in a war or to engage a no-fly zone, you have to kill hundreds of Russian soldiers before you even do that. You have to destroy their air-to-air missiles, the SAM missile sites, the command and control, the radar. And then you go out and start shooting down Russian pilots. And then you go back to a base, probably in Germany.
And we're not going to do this. We're not. No, I don't want the Russian KGB, their internet trolls to grab a bit of the audio and play it. So they said Chris Stewart is advocating this. That's what they do, right? That's how they roll.
Absolutely, but it would be a horrible mistake for us to do that, to become involved any more than we are. Our goal now is to try to minimize the suffering and to try to give Vladimir Putin an off-ramp. And one of the most interesting things you have to look at is what is his state of mind? People ask, is he rational? There's no evidence at all that he's not rational. But there's all sorts of evidence that he's fearful obviously for his own personal safety and for his future. And when the president says things like, we're going to get rid of him and he's a war criminal, opening up the door to when hostilities end, asking for Vladimir Putin to be arrested and tried, that doesn't help. The rhetoric from the president doesn't help if you're trying to minimize rather than to maximize the tension there.
Oh, the rhetoric from the let's not go there. Congressman Chris Stewart, I want you to huddle up with Michael Waltz, the Green Beret, and Mike Gallagher, the Marine, and Jim Banks, the Navy guy, and figure out this budget thing, and just don't let it happen. Last minute to you. What do you think?
Again, this thing isn't mostly dead. It's all the way dead. This budget will not see the light of day. The budget the Republicans write will be very, very different.
That's reassuring. Congressman, good luck to you. When you make up your mind on governor and Senate, let me know. When's the deadline for that, by the way?
Oh, well, it's not for 2 years.
Okay, just checking.
Next time, don't wake me up so early. Remember, I'm the first guy.
Okay. Thank you, Congressman Chris Stewart.
Thanks, sir.
I like having, I'm Hugh Hewitt live inside the Beltway. A couple of months ago, I was in California, and Pastor Jason Aguiar wrote me and said, you got to talk to Rae Le Roux. And I said, who's Rae Le Roux? And he said, next governor of California. So when you got the pastors with you, I tend to listen to people like that. Jenny Rae, welcome to the Hugh Hewitt Show. Tell us about you.
Thanks so much for having me. Well, I'm a normal person, a businesswoman who's been in business for over 20 years. I'm a mad mom. I have 3 kids, 2 are in public school in California. And about 2 years ago, I said, who's in charge of this place? Who's the manager of California? And what the heck is going on here? And so I decided to run for governor to revive the California dream, which for many has become a nightmare in recent years.
Now, Jenny Rae, first of all, where do people find you? Where do they find your campaign? If they like what they hear and they want to follow up, where do they go?
Yeah, I'm at JennyRaeCA.com, JennyRaeCA.com. That's also my handle on every social media platform, including TikTok. JennyRaeCA.com, JennyRaeCA.com. So, Jenny Rae, more background. You're a mother of 3. You're sitting. What part of the state are you in? Have you ever done politics before? You know this is a nightmare undertaking. I love enthusiasm, but my buddy Larry Elder got blown out in the recall. You bet. Well, here's one thing. We need somebody who can activate the parts of California that have not been activated before to vote with a conservative. And so I'll just share a little bit about what I think the 3 key issues are and why I'm the one to win this year. Number 1, crime and homelessness are rampant in our streets. And sometimes you just need a mom to step in who's not soft on crime, who says, no, we need a safe place for our families to live. The second is that education, I think, is the social issue of the day. As I mentioned, my kids are in public school, but beyond that, they're actually in a public Spanish immersion school. They're Spanish speakers. And we have a real heart for the Hispanic community in California, which is the sleeping giant of our state. And the third is infrastructure. You know, our power and our water are going to be off this summer. In key election times, our state is going to be on fire. We need solutions for these things. And what you see nationally is that business people who are Republicans in blue states are not just successful at becoming governor, but actually very popular governors in those states. They represent an adult in the room who can get things done.
Sometimes you just need a mom is a great slogan. But let me talk to you a little bit about the teachers' unions. I have 3 kids. They're in their 30s now. They grew up in California. They all went to California public schools. They were great as recently as 20 years ago. They're now in their 30s, and they began the slide into teachers' union chaos. They will spend whatever it takes to take you out, Jenny Rae, if you get momentum. You know that, right? So how are you going to raise enough money?
Well, this is going to be an American campaign. This is not just for California. In order for California to turn around, we need all of America behind us. So I meet with business people every day. I do a business tour at least once a day in the state. And business people are fighters in California. But it's going to be a combination of business people, people who have been in politics and who know what to do and how to get it done, and also just regular everyday people contributing to the campaign. So hope and inspiration are pretty hard to overcome, even with a war chest like Newsom has. And that's what we're going to focus on, hope and inspiration for the state.
Jenny Rae Le Roux is my guest. Again, you can find her at Jenny Rae. That's her 2 first names, Jenny Rae, CA, everywhere. Jenny Rae, when you get out there, will people take you seriously as a mom? You know, Pastor Aguilar said to me, no, she's very serious. So I took his word for it. You know, I don't know you. I don't know where you live. I don't know anything about you, but you have someone vouch for you that I know. How are you going to get people to listen to you?
Well, I do have some credentials. I have an MBA from Columbia Business School. I got a bachelor's in economics from the University of Virginia. I've been at the top of every field that I've ever been in, a successful business owner. My family and I live on a farm. We've been going through all of the same regulations and issues that people in California every day are facing, but I've also been the person to fix them and overcome them, building businesses uphill in a state that doesn't want me to do that. And this is an uphill battle, absolutely, every step of the way. I'm not at all underestimating the task that's in front of me, but I just know that it's possible. That's why I came to California, to build the California dream. And it's possible to build it again, but we have to have longer vision and bigger, bolder solutions. That's exactly what I'm
Jenny, last question. People are walking into South Coast Plaza and stealing $900 worth of stuff. They've had to close stores in L.A. and San Francisco. There is a crazy set of prosecutors. It's an overwhelming problem set, is what I'm saying. Even if you've got your MBA from Columbia, I used to live at 110th Broadway. I know what that means. But you got 1 minute
Tell people that you can get it done, because I hope you can.
Well, what I've done in business is what I'll do here. You have to do two things: great ideas, but more importantly, change the culture. The answer has to be, how do you solve wildfires in 5 years, not how do you make tiny incremental change. And so bigger, bolder solutions are the way that you move the needle. That's what we'll do in California. And we'll do it through the 5 tools of the governor, which are different than the tools of the legislature. We need an adult in the room to be the one who says no on crime, yes on the future. And that's our focus for California.
At Joni Rae CA, Jenny, capital RAE, capital CA. Joni Rae, good to meet you. Come back. And Pastor Jason was right. I appreciate your being here. Thank you all. Thank you, Harley. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Dash. Has Dash left already? Dash Patterson? That name is taken off, by the way. It's everywhere. Have you got that changed on your lower third yet? Are you Dash Patterson yet on the lower third? Oh, we're out of time. All right, America. Dash Patterson and I'll be back tomorrow on the next Hugh Hewitt Show.